The summer sun of Alabama burned like judgment that year. It sat heavy over the wide fields of cotton, where the air shimmered and the earth smelled of salt and sweat. On the horizon, the Whitlock plantation rose from the heat. White walls, green shutters, and the great cypress trees that lined the long dirt road leading to the house. Inside that house lived Eleanor Whitlock, a widow before 30. Her husband, Colonel Nathaniel Whitlock, had died the year before. Some said of fever, others whispered of guilt. Whatever the truth, Eleanor had inherited both his land and his sins. Every morning, she walked the veranda with her gloved hands clasped, her black gown dragging like a shadow. The workers on the fields would lower their eyes when she passed, though no one could tell if it was from fear or pity. For in the silence of the plantation, they all knew, this woman ruled not with cruelty, but with something far more dangerous: memory. Eleanor had not been born cruel. Once, she had been the daughter of a pastor from Savannah, a woman who painted lilies and spoke kindly even to strangers. But plantation life was not kind to anyone, not even to the mistress. The land demanded obedience, the books demanded profit, and the ghosts of the fields demanded remembrance. Among those ghosts was a man named Samuel. He had come to the Whitlock estate in chains years before Eleanor's marriage. He was strong, quiet, and clever, a man who could read the sky and predict storms before they came. Nathaniel had hated that about him. Too much mind for a field hand, he used to say. But Eleanor had seen something different, a light behind the silence. When Nathaniel's cruelty grew, Samuel endured it without a word. He worked harder than most, not for his master, but for the earth itself, as if he was trying to reclaim something from it. And when the colonel's whip fell too harshly, Eleanor would turn her eyes away, her heart splitting in two. One part mistress, one part witness. Then came the day Nathaniel did not rise. The doctor said it was fever. The preacher called it God's justice. The overseer muttered that Samuel's eyes had looked too calm that week. But no one could prove anything, and Eleanor never asked. Instead, she buried her husband behind the old oak grove without a tear. For weeks the house was silent. The servants whispered that at night the mistress walked the halls barefoot, speaking to someone unseen. Once one of the maids swore she heard a man's voice answering her, deep and sorrowful. Then, one humid evening, Eleanor called for Samuel. He came to the veranda, where lanterns burned low, and the scent of rain drifted in from the west. She stood there in her black dress, hair undone, eyes sharp but tired. "Do you believe in redemption, Samuel?" she asked. He hesitated. "For some, maybe. Not for all." She looked at him for a long time, as if trying to read his soul. "You've served this house longer than any man alive. You've carried burdens that weren't yours. I can't change what's been done here, but I can make a promise." Samuel said nothing. The thunder rolled beyond the hills. Eleanor continued, voice steady. "As long as I live, no whip will touch your back. No order will chain your hands. You will answer to no one but yourself. And when I die, this land will no longer bind you." The promise hung in the air like lightning. To the others, it might have sounded mad, a widow freeing one of her husband's slaves, but to Samuel it was the first breath of something that had no name. He bowed his head, not in servitude but in understanding. "Then I'll serve the land, not the house," he said quietly, and Eleanor nodded. "Serve the truth." That night, the storm came. Rain swept the fields clean, thunder shook the house, and somewhere in the dark, the ghosts of the past turned restless. In the morning, the overseer was gone, fled without a word. The workers whispered that the mistress had cursed him, that she had spoken her husband's name to the wind and driven the man to madness. Eleanor never denied it. From that day on, she and Samuel worked side by side, rebuilding what was left of the plantation. The fields began to change. The crops were rotated, the work hours shortened, the lash never seen again. The nearby planters called her foolish, accused her of ruining her inheritance. But she didn't care. She had made a promise, and in the stillness of the cypress grove, she often felt as though someone or something was watching, waiting, weighing her soul. One night, as the wind moved through the trees like whispering voices, Eleanor stood by the window and spoke softly to the dark. "If redemption has a price," she said, "then let me pay it." A low hum answered her, the sound of rain, or perhaps the sound of a man's voice carried by memory. Either way, she didn't sleep that night. The summer of 1841 deepened into something strange. The fields that once shimmered gold began to rustle with whispers after sundown. The wind carried voices, soft as breath, too human to be the earth's. Eleanor noticed it first. Some nights, she'd wake before dawn to the creak of the shutters, the slow moan of the cypress trees, and the faint rhythm of footsteps where no one should be. Each time she lit her lantern and went to the window, the yard would be empty, only mist moving between the stables. By day, the plantation seemed normal. The cotton grew thick, the air was heavy with the scent of lilac and damp soil, and Samuel oversaw the work quietly. But at dusk, the stillness changed. Even the birds fell silent. The people began to fear the twilight. One afternoon, as the last light melted over the fields, young Mary, a servant girl, came running from the well, her hands trembling. "There's someone out there, ma'am," she gasped. "By the old oak grove." Eleanor followed her out, Samuel beside her, both carrying lanterns. The air hung thick, too quiet, and the sky burned orange and violet. They reached the grove. Nothing moved but the wind, yet on the ground, the grass was pressed down, as if someone had been kneeling there. At the center of the hollow was a small wooden cross, newly carved, sticking from the soil. Eleanor's hand went cold. She had buried her husband here, but this was no marker she had placed. "Samuel," she whispered, "did you—" He shook his head slowly. "No, ma'am, but whoever did wanted you to see it." The next morning, the cross was gone. For weeks, the signs grew. Lanterns flickered when Eleanor walked the halls. Doors she locked at night stood open by dawn. Once she found her late husband's journal on her desk, though she hadn't touched it in months. Each page was blank except one. Scrawled across it in a hand she recognized were 3 words: "The land remembers." Eleanor stared at the ink until her eyes burned. It wasn't possible. The man was dead, the book untouched since his burial, yet something about the phrase made her heart twist. Later that night, Samuel came to her office. His face was grave, the lamplight carving deep shadows across his features. "You feel it too," he said quietly. She didn't deny it. "It's not just the wind," he went on. "The men on the field, they hear the same thing. Names, prayers, the sound of chains moving underground." Eleanor's throat tightened. "Chains?" Samuel nodded. "This land holds more graves than we were ever told. You know that, don't you?" She turned away. She did know. Her husband had expanded the plantation on land that once belonged to others. Stolen, soaked in blood, left unmarked. She'd heard the stories, seen the half-dug patches of soil beyond the river where the earth never stayed still. That night, the widow couldn't sleep. She lit her lantern and walked out toward the fields. The moon hung low, a thin silver blade cutting through mist. The cotton swayed softly, whispering like cloth against flesh. Somewhere distant, an owl cried. And then, she heard it. A hum, low, rhythmic, almost a song. She followed the sound to the riverbank, her heart pounding. There, in the dim light, she saw Samuel standing still, eyes closed, humming a tune older than the house itself. "What are you singing, Jarl?" she asked. He didn't turn. "A song for those who aren't free to rest." The words chilled her. "You mean—" He finally looked at her. "The ones buried without names, the ones your husband forgot." The river shimmered behind him, black and endless. Eleanor's lantern flickered, casting their shadows long and thin across the water. "Then sing for me too," she said quietly. Samuel frowned. "Why?" "Because I live on the sins of this place," she whispered, "and I don't want them to own my soul." He hesitated, then nodded once, solemnly. He began to sing again, deeper this time, the sound carrying through the mist like a heartbeat under the soil. Eleanor felt something stir in the air, not fear, but sorrow, as if the very earth wept through the melody. When the song ended, she felt lighter, yet she knew this was only the beginning. The next morning, the overseer's old cabin caught fire without cause. No one had gone near it, yet by dawn it was ash. And beneath the cypress grove, a second wooden cross stood in the ground. Morning came to Whitlock Plantation with heavy air, the kind that promised a storm before nightfall. The fields shimmered pale under the rising sun, and the earth felt alive, breathing beneath the weight of memory. Eleanor Whitlock stood at the veranda railing, her eyes tracing the horizon where the mist lifted from the river. Behind her, the house creaked, wood swelling, floors groaning, as if the old mansion was tired of keeping secrets. The second wooden cross had appeared 2 nights ago. No one dared touch it. Not Samuel, not the workers, not even Eleanor. It stood at the edge of the cypress grove, half-buried, nameless and silent. Samuel came up the steps quietly, his hands still streaked with soil. "The men are uneasy," he said. "They want to stop work until the storm passes." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Let them rest. The land isn't kind when it's restless." Samuel studied her face. "You've changed since the night by the river." "Maybe I've started to listen," she replied. The widow turned her gaze toward the fields again. Somewhere far below she thought she heard the faint rush of water, not the sound of rain, but something deeper, moving beneath the soil. By noon, clouds gathered thick above the plantation. The cypress trees swayed as wind coiled through them, carrying the scent of rain and earth. Eleanor walked through the low, where halls, her candle trembling in her hand. She found herself drawn toward the basement, a part of the house she had never dared to explore. The door was locked with an old iron latch, cold to the touch. It had been sealed since Nathaniel's death. For a long time she stared at it, then turned to fetch the key from her husband's old desk. When she opened the door, a gust of damp air swept out, heavy and cold. The steps creaked as she descended, the candlelight flickering against stone walls. At the bottom she found a tunnel, narrow, lined with brick, stretching into blackness. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling. The sound was unmistakable now, the rush of a river flowing beneath the earth. Eleanor held her candle higher. The air shimmered faintly with mist. On one wall she noticed markings, chalk lines, crude names, symbols of prayer scratched by hand. She touched one of the carvings. "What is this place?" Behind her, Samuel's voice answered softly, "It's where they used to hide." She turned, startled. He stood at the bottom of the stairs, lantern in hand. "Before your husband built over it," he said, his tone low. "This was a passage that led to the river. People ran through here in the dark, trying to find freedom before they were caught." Eleanor's chest tightened. "And he sealed it?" Samuel nodded. "After the raids began, said he didn't want rats in his house." She felt sick. Her husband's cruelty had carved tunnels through time, and now the ghosts of the past were stirring again. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. "I didn't think you'd believe me." Eleanor stepped deeper into the tunnel. The air grew colder, the sound of water louder. At the end of the passage was a wooden door swollen with age. When she pushed it open, the candle almost went out. There was a chamber beyond, small, circular, and half-flooded. The floor was littered with rotted crates and rusted chains, but in the center of the chamber lay something else, an old iron chest. Eleanor knelt beside it, brushing the dust away. The lock was broken long ago. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were letters, hundreds of them. Each one bore the same name in faded ink. Nathaniel Whitlock, her husband's letters. She opened one. The writing was hurried, smeared. "If they find out what I've done, they'll hang me before dawn. I hear them in the walls, whispering through the floors. I built this house over their bones. God forgive me, I built it over their bones." Eleanor dropped the paper, her breath catching. The river beneath the house roared louder now, echoing off the walls like a heartbeat. "Samuel," she whispered, "this is why the land won't rest. It's not just guilt. It's graves." He looked at her silently. "Then what do we do?" She turned toward the dark passage, her candle trembling in her hand. We uncover what's buried. All of it. Lightning flashed through the cracks in the ceiling, illuminating the chamber. And for one fleeting instant, Eleanor saw faces in the reflection of the water. Dozens of them, pale and silent, watching her from beneath the surface. When the thunder came, it sounded like a scream. The storm that night never broke, yet thunder rolled over the land for hours, trapped inside the clouds. It was as if the sky itself refused to cleanse the soil below. Eleanor Whitlock hadn't slept since she found her husband's letters. The words echoed in her head like a fevered prayer. I built it over their bones. Now she sat in her study, oil lamp flickering, the rain hammering at the window panes. On the desk before her lay the open chest, the letters spread out like the pages of a curse. Each one revealed a little more of Nathaniel's guilt, of tunnels beneath the plantation, of land taken by blood, of a night when voices rose from the earth itself. Across the room, Samuel stood silent. He had read the letters too. His face was still, but his eyes burned with something between sorrow and fury. You see now, he said softly. The ground was never empty. It remembers what was buried under it. Eleanor looked up at him. If this is true, then everything here, every field, every harvest, is cursed. Samuel shook his head. Curses aren't born, they're made, and maybe they can be unmade. Outside, lightning flashed white across the sky, throwing their shadows against the walls. The storm had grown close, the kind of storm that could strip a roof bare. Eleanor gathered the letters. Then we start tonight. They went to the grove just after midnight. The air was thick with mist, the cypress trees towering like black pillars. The lantern in Eleanor's hand barely lit more than a few steps ahead, but she knew the way by heart. When they reached the second wooden cross, Samuel stopped. Here, he said, this is where the ground feels hollow. He struck his shovel into the dirt. The sound was dull, a hollow thud, not the weight of solid earth. Eleanor knelt beside him, brushing the topsoil away with her hands. Soon, they uncovered what looked like the edge of a stone lid. Is it a grave? She whispered. Samuel ran his fingers along the stone, tracing the carvings worn smooth by time. No, he said finally, it's older. Together they lifted the slab. Beneath it was a pit, shallow, dark, and lined with brick. Inside were bones, dozens of them. Eleanor gasped. The skulls were small, some no bigger than a child's. Around them lay fragments of pottery, cloth, and coins. Offerings. Samuel bowed his head. They built the house on sacred ground. Eleanor felt the weight of 100 winters pressing down on her. Then how do we make it right? By letting them rest. He reached into the pit and began carefully gathering the remains one by one. Eleanor helped him, her hands trembling, the rain mixing with the soil and ash. When they finished, Samuel lit a lantern and placed it inside the hollow. The light flickered, golden against the bones, and the mist around them began to stir. Eleanor stepped back. Do you feel that? Samuel nodded. They're listening. Then the wind changed. It rose from the earth like a breath. Not cold, but heavy, carrying whispers that wrapped around them in fragments. Redeem the land. Free the truth. Let the river run clear. The words came and went like sighs. The grove glowed faintly with pale light, and for a brief moment Eleanor saw them. Figures made of mist and memory, standing among the trees, faces calm, not angry. Samuel whispered, "They've been waiting for this." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Then it's done." But the ground trembled beneath her feet. Slow at first, then stronger, as though something deeper still wanted to be heard. A crack split the soil near the stone pit, revealing a thin stream of water bubbling up. It spread quickly, turning the dirt to mud. Samuel pulled Eleanor back. "The river," he said, "it's beneath us." The water kept rising, filling the pit, washing over the bones. It wasn't violent. It was cleansing, soft and rhythmic, like breath. Eleanor watched as the lantern flame danced on the surface. They're taking back what was theirs. When the rain finally stopped, the grove was quiet again. The cross still stood, but now it leaned slightly, its base washed clean by the new stream flowing toward the river. Eleanor looked up at the first pale hint of dawn breaking through the clouds. For the first time in years, she felt the air lighten. "The curse is lifting," Samuel said quietly. Eleanor nodded. "No, it's remembering." That morning, as the workers came to the fields, they found the air fresh, the soil softer than before. The crops, which had been failing for weeks, stood taller, leaves glistening, but deep below the river still whispered. The land had not forgotten, it had only forgiven, for now. 3 weeks after the storm, sunlight returned to Whitlock Plantation for the first time in months. The air smelled of wet pine and new earth. The cypress grove, once heavy with dread, now shimmered faintly in the mornings, as if breathing again. Eleanor Whitlock stood on her veranda, wrapped in a shawl. She looked out across the fields where the workers moved quietly, planting again. For the first time since Nathaniel's death, the land felt alive. But in her chest, something still whispered, unfinished. From behind her came the sound of hooves. A carriage rolled up the muddy road, black lacquer gleaming in the sun. A man stepped out, his boots polished, his coat finely tailored despite the long travel dust. His hair was silver at the temples, but his stride had the certainty of someone used to owning every room he entered. "Mrs. Whitlock," he said, bowing slightly, "it has been far too long." Eleanor's hand tightened around her shawl. "Mr. Davenport," she said coldly, "I was told you had left Alabama for good." He smiled thinly. "And yet I found myself called home." That afternoon they sat in the study, the same study where, weeks earlier, Eleanor had burned her husband's final letters. Davenport's eyes flicked across the room, noting every absence. The missing chest, the absence of dust where something had recently been moved. "I came to discuss business," he said, pouring himself tea without asking. "Your late husband owed several debts to my firm. I'm sure you understand the delicacy." Eleanor folded her hands. "The debts were cleared. The land is mine." "Ah." He smiled again, thin as a blade. "That's one interpretation." He slid a paper across the desk, a deed, old and yellowed. Eleanor recognized the seal. It bore the mark of her husband's company from 1837. "You'll see," Davenport continued, "that the western fields and the grove were pledged as collateral for an unfulfilled shipment. If that contract is still valid, then you're trespassing," Eleanor interrupted sharply, "because that grove no longer belongs to anyone." For the first time, his confident face flickered. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. The wind was still, the moon a perfect white disk above the trees. She rose, wrapped herself in her shawl, and went to the window. From the veranda she saw a light, faint, down by the grove. A lantern, moving. Samuel. She hurried down the path, her bare feet brushing the damp grass. But when she reached the grove, the lantern was gone. The earth where they had uncovered the bones was smooth, untouched. "Samuel?" she whispered. No answer. Only the soft murmur of the new stream. Then, a sound. A shovel against dirt. Eleanor turned sharply. Someone was digging again, near the far side of the grove. She moved closer, heart pounding. "Who's there?" The shovel froze mid-swing. Then a voice she hadn't expected. "Good evening, Mrs. Whitlock." Mr. Davenport straightened, lantern in hand, his boots caked with mud. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. He smiled. "I could ask the same. You and your servant left quite an impression in this place. Do you even know what lies beneath?" Eleanor stepped closer. "You shouldn't be here." "Oh, but I should." He tapped the shovel against the ground. "Your husband's letters mentioned a foundation, a vault built before any house stood here. He said it was meant to store gold from the Spanish War. I think he lied. I think it's still here." Her throat tightened. "You've read his letters?" He grinned. "A pity you burned them, but I had my copies." The air around them began to stir, a faint, unnatural wind. The trees shivered, though the sky was calm. "Leave this place," Eleanor said quietly. "It's not meant for you." Davenport laughed. "Ghost stories. Come now, this land isn't cursed, it's rich, and I intend to rebuild the house your husband could never finish." He plunged the shovel down again. The dirt gave way with a hollow sound. A low moan rolled up from the earth. Eleanor froze. Davenport looked down. "What the devil?" The ground split. A rush of cold air burst upward, snuffing out his lantern. In the darkness, something like a whisper slid through the grove, 100 voices speaking at once. "He returns what was taken. He rebuilds what was buried. The debt is never paid." Davenport stumbled back, eyes wide. "What is that?" Eleanor's voice trembled. "The land. It remembers." He dropped the shovel, backing away. "You've gone mad." But before he could finish, the earth beneath him sank, soft as water. The mud swallowed his boots, then his legs. Eleanor reached out. "No, stop." But the grove answered with a roar, wind, soil, and whispering voices all rising as one. Davenport's scream echoed once, then vanished into the ground. The wind stopped. Silence fell. Only the stream remained, its gentle ripple masking the absence of sound. Eleanor fell to her knees. "It's starting again," she whispered. From the shadows, Samuel stepped forward, face pale. "I saw him go," he said quietly. "The land won't take mercy this time." Eleanor turned to him. "Then we end it, once and for all." He nodded slowly. "Then we destroy the foundation." By dawn, the grove looked unchanged. Birds returned to the trees. The stream ran clean, but beneath it something stirred, a pulse deep in the ground, slow and patient. And in the distance, from the direction of the old Whitlock Manor ruins, came the faint creak of wood. Someone, or something, was rebuilding the house. The morning after the storm, Ashgrove Estate lay quiet. Too quiet. The trees had stopped whispering, the air hung heavy, and the new river that had carved itself through the fields now ran clear as glass. Eleanor Ashgrove stood at her window, staring at the grove beyond. The sunlight spilled through the mist in pale ribbons, touching the ground where Davenport had vanished the night before. She hadn't slept, neither had Samuel. When the first crow called, she turned from the window. "He's gone," she whispered. Samuel, standing by the door, said quietly, "The earth took him, but it won't stop there." Eleanor drew a long breath. "Then we finish what your ancestors began. We go below." They left before noon. The path to the ruins of the old house wound through tangled vines and broken stone. What had once been Nathaniel Ashgrove's grand hall was now a skeleton, fallen beams, cracked tiles, and ivy climbing the walls like veins. At the center of what was once the drawing room, a square of flagstones had shifted, and beneath them a faint hollow sound echoed when struck. Samuel knelt, brushed away the moss, and found the edge of a rusted iron ring. "Here," he said. Together they pulled. The slab lifted, releasing a breath of cold air from the dark below. A stairway descended into the earth. They lit lanterns and began their descent. The steps were narrow, cut from limestone, slick with damp. The walls were carved, faint inscriptions half lost to time. Samuel ran his hand along them. "Old words," he murmured. "Not English. Older." Eleanor's lantern flickered. "What do they say?" He shook his head. Something about remembrance and return. The air grew colder the deeper they went. Then the stairs ended in a chamber. At first glance it seemed empty, just stone and shadow. But when Eleanor raised her lantern, light shimmered off symbols carved into the walls, hundreds of them circling the room. At the center stood an altar, small, square, and made of black stone. Upon it a single object, a silver locket. Eleanor's heart skipped. "That's mine," she whispered. Samuel frowned. "How could it be?" She stepped closer, trembling. The locket was old, tarnished, but inside, under the cracked glass, was her mother's portrait. "I lost this when I was a child," she said softly. "It vanished from my room." Samuel's eyes narrowed. "Then it's true. The vault remembers everything that was lost to this land." A sound rose, faint at first, then swelling, whispers, hundreds of them, circling the chamber like wind. Ashgrove, remembrance, blood paid, blood returned. Eleanor clutched the locket. They're not angry, they're waiting. Samuel took a step toward the altar. For what? Suddenly the lanterns dimmed. A pulse of light rippled through the carvings, symbols flaring one after another, until the whole vault glowed with pale blue fire. From the stone walls, shapes began to emerge, faint outlines of figures, transparent, ancient, men, women, children, the long-forgotten. Their eyes, if they could be called eyes, turned toward Eleanor. A woman's voice rose above the whispers. The house was built upon promise and deceit. The land was sealed with silence. Eleanor's lips parted. "Who are you?" "I am what remains of those who built your world," the voice said. "The vault was meant to guard the truth, but your kind buried it." Samuel stood beside her, breath visible in the cold. "Then tell us how to end it." The blue light flickered, casting deep shadows across the altar. The voice replied, "End? There is no end. The blood of the builders flows in you both. The land remembers its children. You cannot destroy what you are made of." Eleanor trembled. "Then what must I do?" The voice grew softer. "Remember, rebuild with truth, not with silence." The light began to fade. The figures dissolved into mist. The whispers sank into the walls, leaving only the faint hum of water dripping somewhere unseen. Eleanor stood motionless, clutching the locket. Samuel touched her shoulder. "We've seen what no one should." She nodded slowly. "And now, we tell the world." When they climbed back into daylight, the grove was bright and silent, almost peaceful. But the ground beneath their feet felt alive, pulsing faintly, like a heart too old to stop beating. From the hill, the ruins of Ashgrove House shimmered in the heat. For the first time, Eleanor understood. The curse wasn't punishment, it was memory. And memory, once awakened, never sleeps again. For 3 days after their descent into the vault, the skies above Ashgrove stayed clouded and grey. Not storming, not calm, as though the heavens themselves were undecided. Eleanor Ashgrove barely ate or slept. Her thoughts churned with every whisper from the vault, every word that ghostly voice had spoken. Rebuild with truth, not with silence. In the parlour, old blueprints of the estate lay scattered across the floor. They were Nathaniel's, drawn years before he died. Samuel knelt among them, tracing his fingers over the faded lines. "See here," he said. "The house was meant to stand over 5 foundations, but the western foundation is missing," Eleanor finished. He nodded. "Exactly. The vault lies beneath that missing foundation." Eleanor frowned. "Then the vault wasn't an accident. It was part of the design." She sat down, eyes wide. "What if Nathaniel knew about it all along?" Samuel's voice dropped low. "Then maybe he wasn't just building a house. Maybe he was trying to seal something away." That evening they went to the library, one of the few rooms untouched by ruin. Dust hung thick in the air, and the smell of leather and old ink clung to everything. Eleanor searched the high shelves until she found a cracked, red-covered journal marked 1840. Inside, in Nathaniel's familiar hand, were drawings of symbols, the same ones carved into the vault walls. Beneath them, words in uneven script. The builders left their mark beneath every stone, 5 signs to guard the land, the sun to bring light, the river to cleanse, the tree to bind, the hand to labor, the eye to remember. Samuel leaned closer. 5 signs, 5 foundations, Eleanor whispered. A covenant. But near the final page, Nathaniel's writing turned frantic, lines scratched over one another. "When the eye awakens, the house shall rebuild itself. The builders will rise to reclaim their work." She stared at the words, "The house will rebuild itself." Samuel stepped back. "That explains what we heard, the creaking timbers. It's not rebuilding, it's reawakening." Outside, wind howled suddenly against the shutters. The lanterns flickered. Eleanor closed the journal, her fingers trembling. "If the eye awakens, what happens to us?" Before Samuel could answer, a deep groan echoed from below the floor. Wood bending, stone shifting, both froze. The sound came again, louder this time, from beneath the parlor, where the western foundation had once been. They rushed outside. The earth near the grove had cracked open again, wide enough to see down into the dark, and from the depths came the unmistakable creak of beams and chains, as if something vast was moving underground. Samuel shouted over the wind, "It's starting!" Eleanor clutched the journal. "We have to stop it." But the air grew heavy, the trees bending toward the pit. The wind carried voices, not words this time, but tones, low, rhythmic, chanting. Sun, river, tree, hand, eye. The 5 symbols, the 5 foundations, were calling to each other. They ran to the chapel ruins, the oldest structure on the estate. Beneath its cracked altar, a carving gleamed, one they hadn't noticed before, a single open eye surrounded by spirals. Samuel whispered, "The 5th sign." Eleanor knelt beside it. The eye, it's already awake. The symbol pulsed faintly with blue light, as though it were breathing. When she touched it, cold fire ran through her hand. In her mind, a voice spoke, calm, ancient, vast. "Remember what was promised." She staggered back. "It spoke to me." "What did it say?" Samuel asked. "That the promise must be fulfilled." That night, the ground trembled again. From her window, Eleanor watched in horror as parts of the estate, fallen beams, shattered stones, began to shift. Slowly, impossibly, they moved on their own, sliding across the earth, fitting together like puzzle pieces. The house was rebuilding itself. Samuel burst through her door. "It's alive, Eleanor. The estate, it's rebuilding by its own memory." They ran outside. The wind tore through their clothes, carrying dust and light. The foundation glowed faintly, symbols burning along its edges. "Stop!" Eleanor shouted into the storm. "This isn't what you want." But the ground rumbled, and a deep voice, not cruel, not kind, echoed through the air. "The house remembers its builder." Sir Samuel shouted over the roar, "Eleanor, the prophecy said rebuild with truth, not silence. Maybe this is our fault. Maybe we've been hiding it too long." Eleanor raised the journal. "Then we tell it," she cried. "We tell the truth." She threw the open book into the light. Pages scattered, the words carried upward by the wind. Every line of deceit, of debt, of loss. The rumbling slowed. The blue glow dimmed. For a moment the world was still. Then, silence. The wind ceased. The light faded. And when they opened their eyes, the house stood again. Whole, untouched, perfect, as it had been decades ago. But it was empty. No creak, no sound, no breath. Eleanor whispered, "We did it." Samuel shook his head slowly. Or it did. As dawn broke, sunlight spilled across the restored Ashgrove house. In the reflection of one upper window, a shadow moved, faint, watching. The builders had returned. When the sun rose over Ashgrove that morning, it seemed like a miracle. The house, the real house, stood complete once again. No broken beams, no cracked walls. The ivory columns gleamed. The roof shimmered with dew. Even the gardens, long dead and forgotten, were green once more. Eleanor Ashgrove stood at the edge of the drive, unable to breathe. It was exactly as she remembered it from her childhood dreams, except she had never lived to see it whole. Samuel walked beside her, silent, wary. "It's beautiful," he murmured, "and wrong." Eleanor nodded, "Because it shouldn't exist." They crossed the veranda. The door, tall and black, stood ajar, as though inviting them. No wind moved, yet it creaked softly when she touched it. Inside, air hung thick with the scent of cedar and dust. The scent of time. The hallway stretched long, candle sconces flickering with unseen fire. Portraits lined the walls, their eyes following her as she walked. Eleanor whispered, This isn't memory. It's imitation." Samuel glanced around. Maybe both. They moved room by room. The parlor, the library, the dining hall. Each one looked exactly as it had decades ago, down to the smallest detail. The same china, the same cracked vase, even the faint scratch in the wood of the banister where Nathaniel had once slipped. "Look," Samuel said suddenly, pointing. Above the fireplace hung a large painting, 2 figures standing before the house, a woman in white and a man beside her. Their faces were blurred but familiar. Eleanor stepped closer. Her voice broke. "Samuel, that's us." Before their eyes, the painted figures began to sharpen, her own features emerging from the brushstrokes, his beside hers, eyes solemn and knowing. Samuel whispered, "The house remembers us." They turned toward the hallway, sir, and froze. Carved into the wall near the baseboard were names, dozens of them, each etched deep into the wood, glowing faintly. Eleanor ran her hand along them. "These are the workers who built it." But as her fingers reached the last few lines, she stopped. At the very bottom, 2 fresh carvings gleamed with faint blue light. Eleanor Ashgrove, Samuel Reed. Her hand fell away. "It's writing us into its memory." Samuel's jaw clenched. "Then, we're already part of it." They fled to the main hall, searching for an exit, but the doors had changed, no longer leading outside, but into more rooms, more corridors that shouldn't exist. Every path led back to the center, the grand staircase rising upward into shadow. Eleanor looked up. "It wants us to go higher." Samuel hesitated. "Or deeper." The steps groaned beneath their feet as they climbed. The air grew colder. A soft hum vibrated through the wood, like the pulse of a living creature. At the landing, a tall mirror stood framed in gold. Its surface shimmered faintly, not reflecting them but something else. The house as it once was, still decaying. Eleanor whispered, "It's showing us both worlds." Samuel's reflection turned to her. "Maybe we can choose." But then the mirror rippled, and his reflection moved before he did. Eleanor gasped, "Samuel!" He stepped back, eyes wide. His reflection smiled, a slow, unnatural grin, and raised its hand. The real Samuel froze. "It's not me," he whispered. The reflection pressed its palm against the glass, and a handprint burned across the surface, glowing white. The hand to labor. The prophecy's 4th sign. The mirror cracked, shattering outward. Eleanor screamed as shards exploded across the hall, slicing through the air. Samuel pulled her back, shielding her. When the dust settled, the mirror frame stood empty and carved into the wobbles. All behind it, the words glowed faintly. "The builders claim their own." They descended again, desperate, running through the endless hallways. But the house had changed. Walls shifting, rooms repeating, staircases leading into nothing. "Eleanor," Samuel gasped. "We're trapped." She turned, lantern shaking in her hand. "There has to be a way out. It built itself. It can unbuild itself." From somewhere deep within the walls came a voice, calm, echoing, ancient. "Rebuild with truth, not silence." Eleanor froze. "It's giving us one more chance." She turned to Samuel. "The truth, Samuel. Not the stories, not the guilt. The truth of this house." He nodded slowly. "Then speak it." Eleanor lifted the lantern high, light spilling across the hall. "This house was built on lies," she shouted, "on greed and on fear, but no more. We remember those who built it, those who suffered, those who were forgotten. We remember everyone." The floor trembled, the walls groaned. "Remember," whispered the air, thousands of voices joining hers. Light poured through every crack in the wood, every seam in the floor. Then, in one blinding instant, silence. The light vanished. When she opened her eyes, the house was gone. She stood in the grove again. The sun was rising. The ruins of Ashgrove House lay still, half buried in vines and dust. No sound, no wind, just peace. Samuel stood beside her, breathless. "Did we end it?" Eleanor looked down at the soil, soft and warm beneath her feet. "I think we remembered it." But as they turned to leave, Eleanor caught something out of the corner of her eye. The faint outline of the house reflected in the river's surface, still standing whole in the water's mirror. And in one of its upper windows, A woman in white watched them go. The morning light glittered on the surface of the river like liquid glass. For the first time in months, Ashgrove felt quiet. Too quiet. Eleanor and Samuel stood on the riverbank, their boots sinking slightly into the damp soil. The ruins of the mansion loomed behind them, wrapped in mist. Samuel stared at the reflection shimmering on the water, the faint outline of a house still standing. There, perfect and whole. "Tell me you see it too," he said. Eleanor's voice was low. "I do. It's the echo." "The echo?" she nodded. "The house remembers itself, and what's reflected there isn't gone." The wind shifted, carrying a faint sound, a piano note, soft and distant, coming from the river itself. Samuel turned. "That can't be real," Eleanor whispered. "It's real enough to listen." They followed the river's curve, the air growing colder with each step. Trees bent inward as if bowing toward the water. The reflection shifted as they walked, the image of the house rippling with strange life. Windows glowing faintly, figures moving behind them. Samuel clenched his fists. "It's pulling us back." "Maybe it wants us to finish what we started," Eleanor replied. They reached the old boathouse, or what was left of it. Only a few planks remained above the current, but in the reflection, it was whole again. Eleanor knelt at the edge, her hand trembling over the surface. "I think the house is below." Before Samuel could speak, the water stilled. Their reflections began to move, but not like normal mirror images. The reflected Samuel stepped forward, smiling faintly. The reflected Eleanor stood beside him, her face calm, serene, and older. "They're not us," Samuel whispered. Eleanor nodded. "No, they're who we're supposed to become." Then, from the reflection's depths, a hand reached up, pale, dripping, trembling, and brushed the surface of the real world. Samuel pulled Eleanor back. "Enough! It's trying to pull us in." But the voice that followed was not human. It was hundreds of voices, layered and broken, whispering from beneath the river. The promise was not kept. The soil remembers. Ashgrove was never cleansed. The water began to churn, black silt rising like smoke. Shapes emerged, the outlines of men and women faint as mist, their eyes glowing gold beneath the surface. Eleanor's breath hitched. "The builders? They're still bound here," Samuel said, "and they're angry." One of the figures broke the surface. A woman, her face sorrowful but resolute. She pointed toward the ruins. "Return what was taken," the spirit whispered. Eleanor's voice shook. "What was taken?" The spirit raised a hand, and from the water rose a small wooden box, bound in rusted iron. Samuel caught it before it sank again. It was heavy, too heavy for its size. "What is this?" Eleanor brushed away the moss and read the faded inscription carved across the lid. "Ashgrove's debt is buried beneath its name." They carried the box back toward the ruins. The sunlight dimmed as clouds gathered overhead, the air thick with that same humming energy the house had once held. Eleanor set the box on a fallen stone. "Should we open it?" Samuel asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "Whatever's inside, it's part of the truth." The latch broke easily. The smell that escaped was of old wood, iron, and earth. Inside lay a bundle of parchment, brittle and dark with age. She unfolded the first page carefully. It was a ledger, rows of names, dates, and numbers, but beside each entry were strange markings, not currency, not goods, but symbols of lives owed. "Not debts," Eleanor whispered. "People." She flipped through page after page, her expression hardening. These were the workers, the ones who built the house. Each name traded, each life marked as payment. They weren't remembered, they were recorded. Samuel stared at the last entry, his face pale. "Look at this." At the bottom of the final page, written in bold strokes, "Eleanor Ashgrove, payment pending." Her hand trembled. "That's my name." "But you weren't even born," Samuel said. Eleanor's eyes met his. "Maybe not this me." The ground shook. The ruins groaned as if something deep beneath them stirred. From within the crumbling foundation came a low rumble like a growl. The air thickened with heat and ash. The earth split open near their feet, revealing an old stairway descending into darkness. Samuel stepped back. "It's opening again." Eleanor took the lantern. "Then that's where the debt is buried." "Eleanor." She looked at him once, her voice steady. "If we don't face it, it'll never end." And with that, she stepped down into the dark. The stairway descended deeper than any cellar should have existed. The walls were made of stone, smooth and cold, but pulsing faintly like the heartbeat of something alive. At the bottom lay a vast chamber filled with water, still, black and endless. In the center floated a coffin of white marble, untouched by time. Eleanor approached slowly. The air whispered around her. The price must be paid. She touched the coffin lid. It opened. Inside lay a figure, not skeletal, not living, a preserved body with her own face. Eleanor gasped, stumbling back. Samuel caught her. "It's you." The corpse's eyes opened, golden light spilling out, and a voice, her voice, echoed through the chamber. "I built this house on promises, and you are here to finish them." The water began to rise, creeping over the stones. The reflection on its surface shimmered. The house returning, whole and terrible, standing once more above them. Eleanor looked up. "It's not over yet." Samuel's grip tightened around her hand. "Then we finish it. Together." As the water rose, the walls began to glow with the same ancient symbols, and above them, faintly, the sound of the river's song grew louder, no longer a dirge but a call to remember. The stairway trembled behind them as Eleanor and Samuel stood before the rising water. Above, thunder rolled across the sky. Below, the marble coffin glowed with a faint golden light, breathing in rhythm with the earth itself. Eleanor whispered, "This is where it ends, or begins." Samuel looked at the reflection of her other self, the silent figure lying in the coffin, eyes glowing faintly like lanterns under glass. "She's not just a reflection," he said. "She's the memory that stayed." The air shimmered, thick with energy. Symbols began to appear along the walls, old runes and markings, the same, ones from the ledger pages. They pulsed, one by one, until a low voice filled the chamber. It was neither male nor female, neither kind nor cruel. It was the house itself. The debt was written in names. Each stone, each nail, each beam, paid in lives forgotten. Eleanor stood tall, her voice trembling but strong. "Then remember them now. Let them rest." "Rest?" The voice echoed. "There is no rest where remembrance is false." The water rippled. The water. Faces appeared beneath the surface. Hundreds of them, the workers who had built Ashgrove, men and women, old and young. Some crying, some silent, all watching. Samuel whispered, "They're not haunting it. They are it." The golden light from the coffin spread outward, filling the room. The spirit version of Eleanor rose, standing atop the water's surface, her white dress untouched by the waves. Her eyes were calm, but her tone heavy with centuries. "You bear my name," she said to the living Eleanor, "but you do not bear my burden." "I came to end it," Eleanor answered. "Then you must pay the final due." Samuel stepped forward. "No, she doesn't owe." The spirit raised a hand and the chamber fell silent. The air pressed around them like invisible weight. "This place was built to keep promises," the spirit said, "but it became a prison. Every generation that forgot added another brick." Eleanor's breath shook. "Then I will remember. I will carry every name until they are free." The spirit's expression softened. For a moment, almost human. "Then you will rebuild Ashgrove not with timber, but with truth." The water began to rise faster, swirling around them in a vortex of light and shadow. Samuel grabbed Eleanor's hand. "We have to go." She didn't move. "No, we have to finish it." The coffin shattered, golden light exploded upward, striking the chamber walls, each rune flaring bright before burning away. The faces in the water began to fade, one by one, whispering as they vanished. Free. Remembered. At last. Eleanor cried out, the light flooding through her eyes, her voice echoing with both her own and her ancestors. Let the debt of Ashgrove be paid. When the light faded, there was silence. The chamber was gone. The water was gone. Only the two of them remained, standing in a field of golden grass where the house once stood. No ruins, no ghosts, just wind, sunlight, and peace. Samuel turned to her. Eleanor, she smiled faintly. I think we did it. He looked at the horizon. And the others? They're part of the land now, not forgotten, not bound, remembered. As they walked away, the sun dipped low over the hills. For the first time, Ashgrove was quiet, but at the edge of the river something shimmered, a reflection, faint and soft. The house stood once more, only this time its windows glowed warm and alive, and in one window the spirit of the first Eleanor watched, smiling, fading slowly into the light. A month had passed since the night Ashgrove vanished. The land, once cursed and silent, now bloomed. Wildflowers spread where black vines used to choke the soil. The birds had returned. Even the river ran clear again, carrying sunlight across its rippling skin. And yet, every dawn, Eleanor still awoke before the light, hearing something that wasn't quite there. A soft hum, a whisper under the wind. They'd moved into a small cottage on the far side of the estate, a quiet, ivy-covered home with 2 rooms and a stone hearth. Samuel spent his mornings fixing the roof or tending to the garden. Eleanor spent hers writing in her journal, every name she could remember from the old ledger, every story the land had whispered back to her. This isn't history, she said one evening, her hands ink-stained. It's remembrance. Samuel looked up from the fire. Same thing, isn't it? She shook her head. History is what people choose to remember. Remembrance is what refuses to be forgotten. That night a storm rolled in. Thunder cracked over the hills, and the rain came hard, washing the scent of earth into the air. Eleanor sat by the window, staring at the river that ran just beyond the field. Lightning flashed, and for a split second she saw it again. The house, standing perfectly reflected on the water's surface, as though it had never left. She rose slowly, heart pounding. Samuel stirred behind her. Eleanor? The reflection's back. He joined her at the window, but the water was calm now, empty. There's nothing there. She pressed her palm to the glass. Maybe that's the point. The next morning she found something odd. Near the edge of the field, where the old foundations used to be, a single brick had surfaced overnight. White as bone, gleaming faintly with morning dew. She brushed off the dirt. Etched into its side was a single word: truth. Samuel watched her turn it over in her hands. Maybe the ground's just letting go. Eleanor frowned. Or it's starting over. That evening, a knock came at the door. A stranger stood there. A woman in a dark traveling coat, holding a small parcel wrapped in linen. Her eyes were sharp, but her voice soft. "Forgive me," she said. "I was told Miss Ashgrove lived here now." Eleanor nodded cautiously. "You found her?" The woman smiled faintly. "My name is Clara. I'm a historian from Montgomery. I've been studying the old Ashgrove records." Eleanor stiffened. "Those records were destroyed." Clara held out the parcel. Not all of them. Inside were half-burned pages, fragments of letters and journal entries. One of them bore the Ashgrove family seal, the same one from Eleanor's ancestors' ledger. "Where did you get these?" Eleanor asked. Clara's smile faded. "Someone sent them to my office. No name. Just a note. She'll need them when the river wakes again." That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. The pages lay on the table beside her lamp, whispering faintly as the candle burned low. Each fragment spoke of the same thing, the Ashgrove inheritance, but one line stood out. "The debt ends only when the last promise is kept." She looked at Samuel. What if we didn't end it? What if we only paid part of it? He turned toward her, eyes dark. Then what's left to keep? Outside, the wind rose, howling across the fields, rattling the shutters. From the direction of the river came a low, distant chime, like a bell struck underwater. Eleanor's candle flickered. The flame bent toward the window. She stood slowly, whispering, "The river's waking again." The morning was quiet, the air still heavy with the scent of rain. Eleanor stood by the river where everything had begun. The water was calm, shining like silver glass under the soft light of dawn. She could see her reflection clearly, older now, lined with years and memory, but behind it, faint and warm, the shadow of Ashgrove still shimmered. The curse was gone. The house had fallen, rebuilt, and vanished again. But in its place, something better had grown. The fields that once carried silence now bloomed with wildflowers. The air that had always tasted of dust now carried the smell of life. She walked slowly toward the grove, where rows of carved stones stood like quiet sentinels. Each stone bore a name, the ones she had written from the ledgers, the ones whispered to her through the years, the names of the forgotten. She touched one of them, her fingers tracing the letters. "We remember you," she whispered. "All of you." A soft wind stirred through the trees, bending the tall grass in waves. Somewhere far away, a single bell rang once, not in warning, not in sorrow, but in peace. Eleanor smiled. She could almost hear Samuel's voice in the breeze, teasing her gently the way he used to. "You still talk to ghosts, Ellie?" "Only the ones who listen," she murmured. She sat down beneath the oldest oak, the same one that had once watched the house rise and fall. The river glowed in the distance. Its reflection was calm, no flicker of movement, no haunting lights. Only the sky, endless and quiet. Eleanor closed her eyes. She had spent her whole life chasing the truth of the land, the curse, the memory. And now, at last, there was nothing left to chase. Only peace. When the sun began to rise, it lit the grove in gold. For a moment, just a heartbeat, the reflection of Ashgrove House appeared on the water again, whole, gentle, alive. In one of its high windows, two figures stood side by side, smiling down at her. She smiled back. "We kept the promise," she whispered. Then the reflection faded, melting into the calm river, as though the land itself exhaled. The wind carried her final words across the fields, a voice soft as light saying goodbye. And for the first time in centuries, Ashgrove slept. Not cursed, not haunted, but remembered.